Welcome back to the briefing on Shift by MSNBC. We have a very special guest now, someone who's actually leaving Capitol Hill. He's going over to Jeb Bush world, but he's a world-renowned veteran of Hill politics, spokesman to House Speaker Michael Steele. Thank you so much for being on the show, sir.
It's good to be with you, Luke.
So you've been with the Speaker since 2007?
Yeah, 7 years.
Quite a wild ride.
It's been a lot of fun. We've kind of gone from the depths of some really, really bad elections in 2006 and 2008 to winning the majority in the House in 2010, then the Senate in 2014, and now it's on to the next project.
Let's talk about that shift, because there was a time when Boehner, especially in early 09, was literally the face of the GOP when Democrats were at unseen levels of popularity over the last few decades. How was it like staffing him then, keeping morale up? What was that like?
You know, it was a really fascinating time and a really difficult time because, you know, after the 2008 election losses, House, the Senate, the White House, there wasn't a Republican brand that people were excited about supporting. And at the same time, the president, who had campaigned on these ideas about bringing people together, working across party lines, really didn't walk the walk right from the beginning. So, you know, starting with his massive stimulus project in early 2009, Boehner was the voice of the opposition here in Washington.
And eventually that opposition proved to be very successful. Huge run-ups in 2010, I believe 63 House seats, close to a record. At what point when you guys were in the room in 09 and 10, when a lot of people said, you know what, the Democratic Party has to radically change, did you realize, hey, you know what, maybe we don't have to do that, maybe we just have to point out what the president is doing? When did that go through your mind?
Well, we started fairly early in 2010. It was pretty clear that we were going to have a good year. There was a lot of backlash against the president's policies. Boehner made it clear that we needed to not just oppose what the president was doing, we had to offer our own positive solutions to the problems that the American people were facing. And so the America Speaking Out project, which led to the Pledge to America, a governing agenda built on listening to the American people, was the focus of our efforts for much of 2010.
And then, moving forward, you guys then win. He becomes Speaker. What was the single biggest adjustment to him becoming Speaker? Because then he is the face of the opposition to President Obama. He no longer has McConnell in the same boat of him. He is the highest-ranking Republican.
It was an incredibly exciting time. I mean, the most concrete thing was that we got offices with windows. When you're in the minority in the House, you're kind of shunted away in a sub-basement. It was a tremendous new responsibility. We had this huge freshman class, a lot of members who were citizen legislators, who had not served previously in a legislature, people who were learning the job on the job, and our team, who were suddenly facing much greater responsibilities in terms of running the institution, and again, getting things done, moving things through the House, keeping the government funded. And we moved fairly shortly after that period into the discussions with the president, what a lot of people call the grand bargain talks that leading up to the debt limit increase in the summer of 2011.
And that was a wild time, and I was going to ask you, is it fair to say that was probably the most stressful time of your career here, was the debt limit talks?
It was, I think.
You were dealing with a lot. You were dealing with a lot of Republican turmoil. You were dealing with leaks coming from the White House. And then you also had a ticking time bomb clock that was coming in on you guys.
It was, you know, the Speaker decided very early in the process that if we were going to increase the debt limit, we needed to get real reforms that equaled the increase in the debt limit. We shouldn't increase the spending limit without dealing with the underlying spending problem. And he had what initially seemed like really good, useful conversations with the president. You know, they shook hands in the Oval Office on an agreement, and that fell apart. And then the Speaker had to go and work with congressional leaders to come up with an alternative because, as you say, Luke, the clock was ticking. We were under a lot of pressure.
It was, and you had markets reacting. Yes. Take us into the day-to-day of your job in a moment like that. So essentially, you're not sleeping at that point.
No.
So talk about what the responsibilities are at that point.
The last call of the day comes after midnight. Usually would get 3 calls from the network television correspondents, you and your colleagues, a little after midnight. And the first call of the morning is people going on the morning shows 5:45 a.m. or so. So I basically had 5 hours to sleep when my phone wasn't ringing.
What's the average day like in terms of what the day-to-day you think is?
No, if we're in, when the House is in session.
When you're in session.
When we're in session, I get here at about 7:30. I leave about between 7:30 and 8, depending on the vote schedule. And a lot of it is reading the news in the morning, reacting to things that I think are, have missed some context or missed some information in the overnight news reports, and then pressing to try and get our view, our voice, the good work that the House is doing, communicate that to the American people.
Let's talk about that for a moment in terms of people out there who want to become press secretary at some point in their life. How much influence do you think you specifically have? Because if I'm reading an article, sometimes I know exactly when there's a blind quote that it came from you or one of your colleagues. How would you sort of say crafting the process has evolved in this era where it's no longer just a newspaper front page or just a Today Show or a morning show hit? You really have Twitter, you have blog posts, you're getting hit from your own party, you're getting hit from the left party, you're getting hit from the mainstream media. How do you craft the narrative this day and age?
Look, it's faster. There's no question that it's faster. There's also no question that we have more and more tools to communicate directly with the American people via Twitter, via Facebook posts. So the traditional spokesman job is a smaller but still crucial part of the mix of getting that message across, communicating directly with the American people. And so a lot of my day, I'm a former reporter, a lot of my day is talking to reporters as they begin reporting on a story, in the middle of the process, and at the end. I've really not done my job well if it's 15 minutes to deadline and the newspaper reporter is calling me to say, hey, I need a quote, which is going to run in paragraph 16 of a story that I've already basically written. I've failed if that happens. How much did your time
as a reporter, do you think, helped you in your current job?
I certainly think it helps just in terms of
having... You graduated from Columbia Journalism School.
I did, and worked for a reporter here in Washington for a few years. I think having an idea, the pressures that reporters are under, the way the newsroom works, the expectations, and that helps me be more useful to the reporters that I'm working with.
In terms of where you see everything going digitally, a lot of stuff is now in-house. You guys have a very active speakers blog. You have video content that goes out quickly. Do you think the technology has allowed you guys greater ability to craft a message and control a message?
I think what it's allowed is much greater transparency. I think that if you look at our most successful content is either about policies and how they help the American people or about the speaker himself. He's a fascinating guy, he's a personable guy, and the more people see of him interacting with people in real-life situations, the more they like him.
I think one of the attributes of the speaker is he's not afraid to make fun of himself. What's it been like working for somebody like that? Because I can imagine it gets a little nerve-wracking at times.
It's a lot of fun. The great thing about working for Boehner is he says exactly the same thing in the room that he then says to the reporters outside. He's refreshingly honest about this stuff, and that makes my job a lot easier.
What is your favorite Boehner moment that you can tell on camera?
I think that my favorite Boehner moment was watching him give his speech the night we won the majority in 2010.
Where he started crying.
He started crying. We stayed very, very late. Our chief of staff at the time insisted that we would not have him make a speech, declare victory until we had won the majority, we had all the results in. So it wound up being very, very late in the evening. All the networks had called it, definitely had the majority. And it was an incredibly emotional moment for him. There was a line that I had joked with our speechwriter that was going to make him cry, that he had spent his whole life chasing the American dream. And sure enough, that's when the waterworks started. But that was my favorite moment working for the speaker.
If there's one you could have back in your career, what would it be?
Oh, every now and again I've expressed myself with more vigor than I probably should have when talking with reporters. Those are the moments that I'd probably take back if I could.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, though. It's a little bit fired up, some curse words every now and then. All right, lastly, we'll get you to hear with this one, going over the Jeb Bush operation. Right. John Boehner obviously is a big fan of Jeb Bush. We hear that every now and then. What do you think will be the biggest adjustment for you going to a presidential level of campaign, if you run?
If the governor chooses to run. I mean, I worked for Paul Ryan as the vice presidential candidate in 2012. I have a fair idea what the circus looks like in a lot of ways. I think the biggest difference is going to be living in Miami and working with the team down there as opposed to Washington, D.C. It's a fairly different lifestyle and culture.
It is indeed, and I would just go on that one point, is you've been able to immerse yourself to where you're well respected by Democrats, you're well respected by Republicans, you're well liked by most reporters. How have you been able to do that in such a contentious time in American politics?
I think the most important thing is just tell the truth. And if you're honest with people, if you're...
And FaceTime's important too, because I feel like everybody lives so digitally now, and you make an effort to try and talk to people in person.
I mean, one of the best things that I got in the habit of doing when I started this job was doing, I call it a walkabout. I walk through the press galleries, both the House and Senate, every Monday or Tuesday, and just talk in person with everybody and make that connection.
That's great. Michael Steele, good luck.
Thanks very much.
We'll be right back.